Sup? How you doing? It's Jared. Saw Hom Design Spectre Elite. Blade HQ exclusive with the gold nitride, gold titanium nitride coating on the blade and the blue PVD handles. I'll get it further into that when I get down onto the table. This knife has taught me something, right? Because I thought originally that the majority of the people in there getting so up in arms about bushings versus bearings, right? Bushings versus bearings in Balisong pivots, right? Because there's almost like this little war going on right now over which one is best, right? Well, it's not really a war, but I mean, people get into some heated discussions about which one is actually best, right? And everyone has their own opinion on it. And honestly, I thought it was really just people kind of being melodramatic. I mean, I really didn't think that. I mean, there's definitely a difference. You know what I mean? Flipping a replicant opposed to flipping something like an 87, you know, the bushings versus bearings, there is a difference. There's a definite difference in just the way that they feel, the way that they, you know, the way that it handles, the way that it moves through the air, the way that you have to give the energy to the actual knife to get it to do what you want is different between the two sets of pivot systems, right? And that is definitely true. You guys see that? Check that out. Yeah. But it wasn't enough of a difference, right? There's not enough of a difference between, again, like the replicant over the 87. There's not enough of a difference in the feeling of the pivots to make me think the knives are completely different in feeling, don't get me wrong. But just in the motion, you know what I mean? It wasn't enough to make me think that it was that big of a deal, that dramatic of a difference, right? Until I got my hands on this. Once I actually got my hands on this Hom right here, it's a Hom Spectre Elite, it kind of showed me just the difference if I can actually flip this damn thing. I'm sorry, I'm talking right now. It's hard to flip and talk at the same time. But you know, this thing really taught me that there is a difference because this thing does not feel like any other Balisong that I own. It really has its own individual feeling. It's different in the way that I have to give it energy. And I've got some theories on that. I'll get into that when I get down on the table. But there really is a dramatic difference between bushings over bearings. And I don't know which one I like the best, but I'll definitely tell you that this knife here is a very individualistic in feeling, and I now understand why there's just a Hom cult following. You know what I mean? It's like Hinderers and Chris Reed knives. You know what I mean? People are Jerry Hom knives, right? And this knife here, I don't know, this is the first one that I've ever owned. I flipped the Basilisk for maybe 5 minutes in my version of shitty flipping, and I was scared of dropping it on the ground because it wasn't my knife, so I don't have a whole big experience with the Hom Design, whatever it is. But this knife has shown me that it definitely does matter, especially with as intricate and as just involved of a sport as flipping a Balisong actually is. It's dangerous, you know what I mean? It's very involved. It's very motion oriented, and so having the major difference between something like this knife and something with a bearing pivot, something like an 87 with a bearing pivot, there's a major difference there, and I do think that that's really going to come into play. So this knife has definitely taught me some stuff. I appreciate it. I like flipping this thing, but really I just cut myself. I'm going to get down onto the table, get a little bit further down into this thing. A little bit of bonding time. I ain't flipping y'all off, but y'all wish your Band-Aid was as cool as mine. This is a sick knife. I definitely like it. The gold nitride coating on the handle was, on the blade was a good idea. You know what I mean? Especially with the blue PVD on the handle, because these are titanium handles. I believe they're titanium spacers as well, but it's got that hard anodized or that hard coating on there. That hard coating over the actual anodized coating. Right? Give me 1 second. I like that, right? but it's sticky. Actually, out of the box, I did have a little bit of an issue trying to do a chaplain, because every time I would wrap around it, kind of wanted to stick to my finger, right? Just stick in there a little bit, and it kind of walked itself off every time I'd spin it around my finger. And it was the same thing with just a lot of motions. It was a little bit sticky out of the box, but it's kind of worn in, and it's gotten a little bit slicker. It still is grippy, you know. I mean, it actually almost feels like something like this bead blasting on the 87 here, when you give if you're not putting a whole lot of pressure on it, then it's slick. It just kind of slides. But the moment you give any sort of pressure, your finger kind of bites in there. It's got like this almost rubber-esque sort of feeling to it. It does feel like a kind of a rubberized coating. So I really like it, but there are some people out there that may find that as a negative just because it may be a little bit sticky. I don't know, but I do like the fact that I've dropped this knife on the ground on my hard tile floor probably 4 or 5 times. Can you tell where? Where did it hit? I have no idea, because if this was an anodized knife, I would know exactly where it hit. If this was anodized, if it was bead blasted, if it had really almost any other type of coating on there, I would know which handle, you know what I mean, where it dinged, because it wasn't the tip that hit the ground. So where, you know, what hit the ground, I don't know, because this material is actually holding up really well. So it is good on that aspect. But what I was talking about with the bushings over bearings, right? The thing that I can come up with the most to physically demonstrate this, right, is if I lean this knife over, right? I keep leaning it, keep leaning it, keep leaning it, and the handle will fall, right? And if I do the same thing with this 87 right here, Benchmade 87, okay, I'm going to hold it out, and I'll lean it over, and I lean it over just that much. I barely lean it over, right? Lean it over that much, it comes rolling out, because there's no resistance, right? There's no friction in this overall mechanism running on these bearings. That's not the case with this Basilisk right here. I give just a little bit of sideways motion. Come on, if I can actually get this thing to, if I get just give it a little bit of sideways motion, a little bit more, and it eventually falls, right? And so it's at a much more drastic angle that it actually loses its grip and goes into a slip, right? That's not going to be the case when this thing is moving through the air, right? There's enough weight behind these handles that if this thing is flying around, it's going to... it's still going to be moving at this angle. It's never going to be held up, but it does give that little bit of resistance, right? There's that little bit of slowing down effect, right? It's the same thing with this replicant right here. If I can take this BRS replicant and I have to lean this thing further over, it's not as far as the Basilisk, but I still have to lean it a lot further over than if I come in, even into something like this. What is this one right here, right? The 63. If I lean this thing over, you can see almost immediately, right? It's not the same angle. So there's more resistance in this mechanism, excuse me, in this pivot system. There's more resistance, right? And I think that's what gives just the overall feeling behind the actual bushings over bearings. I think that's one of the major contributors. I really love the way that this handle shape is done. The overall handle design here, because you can see it still brings majority of the weight out to the back of this handle. The holes are tapering, getting smaller towards the back of the handle. There's, this is where the spacer is located here. This is all solid material, and so there's still a majority of the weight in the back side of the handle. And you can see how it's just kind of artistically been taken out. The weight's been taken out in the places that it needs to, as well as the taper of this handle, because you can see just the way that it tapers down. It's so much wider in this aspect here than it is in this aspect here, right? From this angle here. And so that really comes into play when I'm doing something like a twirl, right? Because it just wants to stay sideways better, right? Because I don't know if you saw my review for this one. It's a Microtech Tachyon 3, which I kind of messed up, but I sharpened the swedge on, right? Looks pretty good. But in the review video I actually did for this thing, I cut myself. And one of the things that led up to that, when I was actually twirling it, it rolled over. And it's because this handle up here is squared off, right? It's not round. The back end of this handle is round, but the top here is actually squared off due to the actual holes being milled out of it. And so that, rolled over, right? When I wasn't ready for it, when I wasn't expecting it, and it led to me getting cut. This here is just, you really don't have to worry about that. It being so wide in this aspect here and only being square on the back. It's only square on the back end of this handle is where it actually comes and squares out, right? You can see that. And so it's just, it's an excellent design for maneuverability, and I think that goes along with the blade stock, the way that the blade is done as well, because you can see there's not a whole lot of weight carrying out to the end of this knife. There's a decent amount just due to the large section of flat here you've got on the actual grind of this knife, but it does narrow down and taper down, and it's got a very thick stock thickness, right? It's got a good stock thickness. I'll actually put all the specs themselves down in the description. And so the weight, right, balances out because you've got a decently weighted handle, decently back bias weighted handle. I don't mean the knife overall. I mean just the handle itself is decently bias weighted in the back. And so then you've got a more mid-weighted blade, right? It's not as heavy as something like the 87 or the Replicant with as much weight out front. And so it balances out the overall design of the knife, which I think is primarily goes towards that kind of maneuverability, more fast action, right? It's not going to hold the momentum nearly as much as something like this Replicant right here, right? Because all of the weight being way at the back of this handle, just as forward, as much weight as is up at the end of this blade, it's going to carry momentum. It's going to carry that swing, that arc much better, or much more, not necessarily better. It's just easier, just more momentum. And this thing isn't going to do that. The momentum or the energy itself, right? The weight is more centrally balanced. And so I think it all just comes up to your preference of flipping, really. It just comes up to what you really like. This thing did come perfect out of the box, basically perfect as far as fit and finish goes. There's one thing that it does have on here, and it took me a really long time to figure it out. Let's see if you can see it, right? You can see that tang pin, how it's sitting flush with the top of these two handle scales here. When I close it down, it's just not, except it's not. It's actually that side. You can see that tang pin there, the bottom section tang pin is just off. It's nowhere near seating center. That's how it came out of the box, and it hasn't moved. It hasn't shifted. I've actually tapped on it a little bit, not hard at all, but just see if I could get it to move. I didn't. This side is actually perfectly centered, so that one tang pin is the only problem with this entire knife out of the box. Other than that, it's flawless. The handle play here, let me, if I can get you a view of that handle play. And this feels interesting because it's so loose. It's so loose in the actual handle play itself, right? Because there's like flex in this, right? The handle play in this feels like there's a little bit of flex, right? I can feel it like bending, right? It doesn't want to do that. I'm just making it do that. This thing doesn't care. It's just completely loose, except there's no motion. There's basically no handle play there, right? There's no movement between the handles themselves, but it's loose, and it just kind of jiggles around, And so those bushings that's probably excellent. I imagine that's ideal for somebody. I don't know. I have no preference in that. I would prefer absolutely no handle play, but what do I know? I mean? Who knows? So I imagine this is perfect. And I think it's interesting. I'm going to do a video at some point in the future on the differences between Balisongs and just modern folding knives. Because handle play like this, right? If I lock this thing up and just play with this, handle play like that in a modern folding knife would be unacceptable for the small batch production knife, high-end production knife like this. But in Balisongs, that's like ideal. It's perfect. That's actually what people want. And so it's just interesting, the difference between the two genres of knife. I definitely do like this thing. Spectre Elite, the blade shape is excellent. It almost looks like a flame, doesn't it? It reminds me of like a fire, especially with that gold anodized coating on there, that titanium nitride coating, which I have scratched up just a little bit, cutting stuff, but it's a beautiful, beautiful blade shape. I'm not normally the biggest fan of a recurve, but it's a very subtle recurve, and then it looks like a fire. I freaking love it. I called this thing my pimp knife, and I'm sticking to that, man. Gold and blue. I'm definitely a fan of this thing. Yeah, that's it. Hom Spectre Elite. Y'all have a good one.